September 1st, 1939, German troops thrust deep into Poland, aiming for a swift and total victory. Barely 20 years earlier, their fathers had been on the march too, but this time retreating home as a defeated army. In November 1918, after 4 years of the First World War, Germany's Emperor, Kaiser Wilhelm II, was forced to abdicate. His armies were being ground down by a relentless offensive from British, French and American troops. His people were facing starvation. But already a dangerous myth was taking root. The belief that the German army had never been defeated in battle, but betrayed by cowardly politicians at home. Even so, at 11 a.m. on November 11th, 1918, the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, World War I came to an end. The following month, US President Woodrow Wilson arrived in Europe, promising to create a new world order. He persuaded world leaders to sign up to the League of Nations. At the Treaty of Versailles, they agreed that disputes between nations would now be settled not by fighting, but by debate within the League. Europe's map was redrawn. The Austro-Hungarian Empire, Germany's ally, was dismembered. Out of it emerged new nations: Austria, Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. Germany itself was greatly reduced in size, but this process carried a time bomb. Not everyone celebrated these new countries. Several, like Czechoslovakia, contained large German minorities. The desire to reunite the German people would one day come back to haunt Europe. The defeated German people faced one last humiliation. They were forced to pay £6.6 billion in reparations to France and Britain, an enormous sum they could scarcely afford. When Wilson returned to America, his dream of a new world order quickly collapsed. The US Congress refused to join the League of Nations, fearing it would drag the country into another European war. America withdrew into isolationism. Germany was now a very different nation. It was still Europe's largest country, but its militaristic monarchy was gone. It had become a democracy, the Weimar Republic. Yet it was a fragile democracy, soon hit by crisis after crisis. Street battles erupted between right-wing nationalists and left-wing communists. Then, in 1923, the country was devastated by hyperinflation. Prices soared by hundreds of percent per month, wiping out ordinary people's savings. This was fertile ground for a new kind of political demagogue, among them Adolf Hitler. Hitler was born in Austria. He had fought bravely in World War I and been awarded the Iron Cross. Returning to Germany, he settled in Munich, where his fiery speeches soon made him leader of a small group, the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or Nazi Party. In October 1923, Hitler and his followers attempted an armed coup, the Beer Hall Putsch, against the Weimar government. It failed, and Hitler was sentenced to 9 months in prison. There, he wrote Mein Kampf, My Struggle, blaming Germany's troubles on the Jews, and demanding that the nation rebuild its strength and seek new territories in the east. Upon his release, Hitler reorganized the Nazi Party into a disciplined political machine. This time, he would use the democratic system to seize power. For a while, the Weimar Republic recovered. Between 1924 and 1929, Germany prospered, and support for extremist parties faded. But in October 1929, the US stock market crashed, triggering a global depression. German unemployment soared to over 6 million. Once again, people turned to extremists for solutions. By 1931, the Nazi Party had become a true mass movement, supported by millions and backed by its own paramilitary wing, the brown-shirted SA, or stormtroopers, nearly 3 million strong. In the 1932 elections, the Nazis became the largest party in the Reichstag, Germany's parliament. But Hitler refused to cooperate in a coalition, leaving the government paralysed. To break the deadlock, President Paul von Hindenburg appointed Hitler Chancellor of Germany in January 1933. Within a month, the Reichstag burned down. Hitler blamed the communists and demanded emergency powers. With those powers, he outlawed all other political parties. When President Hindenburg died in August 1934, Hitler merged the offices of President and Chancellor, declaring himself Führer, the absolute leader of Germany. At first, the world saw little sign of what was to come. For the next 3 years, Hitler focused on rebuilding Germany's economy. Massive public works programs, including the 5,000-mile Autobahn system, put millions back to work. But behind the scenes, Germany was secretly rearming. Under the Versailles Treaty, its army had been limited to 100,000 men, and it was forbidden from having an air force, tanks, or submarines. Now, that small army was tripled in size. In 1935, Hitler openly defied the treaty. He unveiled a brand new air force, the Luftwaffe, with 2,500 planes, more than Britain or France possessed. Unemployment plummeted. The Nazis became immensely popular. Encouraged by his success, Hitler made his first territorial move. In 1935, the Saar region voted to return from League of Nations administration to German rule. A year later, German troops reoccupied the Rhineland, which had been demilitarized by Versailles. At the time, many believed Hitler was only reclaiming what was rightfully Germany's. Britain and France did not object. When Berlin hosted the 1936 Olympic Games, the Nazis were seen as firm but fair, restoring national pride without seeming to threaten anyone. Yet signs of danger were already visible. In 1935, the Nuremberg laws stripped Jews of citizenship and forbade marriage between Jews and Aryan Germans. Still, the first real threat to world peace did not come from Hitler, but from the Far East. In 1931, Japan, one of the League of Nations founding members, stunned the world by invading Manchuria, a region of northern China rich in minerals and coal. Japan had long been an emerging power. It had modernized rapidly after 1868 and built a powerful military. But the Great Depression hit Japan's economy hard, and its leaders saw conquest as a solution to secure resources and markets. Claiming that Chinese soldiers had sabotaged a section of Japanese railway, the Kwantung Army launched a full-scale occupation of Manchuria without Tokyo's formal approval. Within months, the entire region was under Japanese control. The League of Nations protested, but did nothing. When its investigation concluded that Japan was the aggressor, Japan simply walked out of the League in 1933. The lesson was clear. The League of Nations had no real power. Meanwhile, Germany too had quit the League and was now accelerating its rearmament. Across Europe, another leader had come to power, Benito Mussolini in Italy. Mussolini, once a socialist journalist, had seized power in 1922 after his march on Rome. He promised to restore Italy's ancient glory and transform it into a modern empire. Italy's new Duce leader ruled with a mixture of propaganda, intimidation and pageantry. His black-shirted fascists paraded through Rome as he dreamed of conquering Africa. In 1935, Mussolini launched an invasion of Abyssinia, modern Ethiopia, one of the last independent nations in Africa. Ethiopia's emperor, Haile Selassie, appealed desperately to the League of Nations for help. The League condemned Italy and imposed economic sanctions, but they were weak and excluded vital materials like oil, coal and steel. Worse, Britain and France were unwilling to risk war with Italy. They even secretly offered Mussolini most of Abyssinia in a failed peace proposal, the Laval Pact, which caused outrage when leaked. The result? Mussolini ignored the League entirely. In May 1936, Italian troops captured Addis Ababa, and the King of Italy was proclaimed Emperor of Ethiopia. The League had failed again, and this time it was a public humiliation. Now, Hitler was watching closely. He had just taken his own bold step, the reoccupation of the Rhineland in March 1936. Under the Versailles Treaty, This western strip of Germany bordering France had been demilitarized to act as a buffer zone. When Hitler sent 22,000 troops marching in, French forces could have easily stopped him. His generals later admitted that if France had resisted, the German army would have been forced to retreat. But France hesitated, unwilling to act without Britain's support. And Britain, still weary from World War I, did nothing. Hitler's gamble paid off brilliantly. His prestige in Germany soared. Now, two dictators, Hitler in Germany and Mussolini in Italy, saw themselves as natural allies. Later in 1936, Mussolini announced the formation of a new political and military partnership, the Rome-Berlin Axis. That same year, another dictatorship aligned itself with them, Japan signing the Anti-Comintern Pact, a joint pledge to oppose communism and the Soviet Union. By 1936, the balance of power in the world was shifting dramatically. The democracies, Britain, France, and the United States, were still paralysed by economic depression and war weariness. But Germany, Italy, and Japan were all arming rapidly, united by a shared hostility to democracy and communism alike. The next battleground would be Spain, where fascism and communism would soon clash in a brutal rehearsal for the World War to come. In July 1936, civil war erupted in Spain. A group of army officers, led by General Francisco Franco, launched a revolt against Spain's elected left-wing government. Europe's political divide was suddenly mirrored on the battlefields of Spain. The rebels, known as nationalists, were soon supported by Hitler and Mussolini, who sent troops, tanks, and planes to help Franco. Germany's new Luftwaffe used Spain as a testing ground for its modern weaponry and bombing tactics. One of its squadrons, the Condor Legion, carried out the most infamous raid of the war, the destruction of the Basque town of Guernica in April 1937. For hours, German bombers pounded the defenceless town, killing hundreds of civilians. The attack shocked the world and inspired Pablo Picasso's famous painting Guernica, a haunting protest against the horrors of war. The Spanish government, the Republicans, received limited help from the Soviet Union, while thousands of volunteers from around the world joined the international brigades to fight fascism. Britain and France, desperate to avoid another major conflict, remained officially neutral. By early 1939, the nationalists had won. Franco established a right-wing dictatorship that would last nearly 40 years. For Hitler, Spain was more than a victory for fascism. It was a live experiment in modern warfare. Blitzkrieg, lightning war, had been born. Now, Hitler's eyes turned to his next targets, Austria and Czechoslovakia. Under the Treaty of Versailles, Austria and Germany had been forbidden to unite. But in March 1938, Hitler sent German troops into Austria, claiming they were restoring order at the invitation of Austrian leaders. The invasion met no resistance. Crowds cheered in Vienna as Hitler declared the Anschluss, the political union of Germany and Austria. Britain and France protested but did nothing. Once again, the dictator's aggression went unchecked. Next, Hitler demanded the Sudetenland, a region of western Czechoslovakia with a large ethnic German population. The Czech government, fearing invasion, mobilized its army. France was bound by treaty to support Czechoslovakia, and Europe seemed on the brink of war. But British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain was determined to avoid another catastrophe like 1914. He flew to Germany 3 times in September 1938 to meet Hitler in person. At Munich, Chamberlain, French Premier Edouard Daladier, Hitler and Mussolini reached an agreement. Germany would receive the Sudetenland in exchange for promising no further territorial demands. The Czechs, not even invited to the conference, were forced to accept. When Chamberlain returned to London waving the agreement, he declared it meant peace for our time. But in reality, it was a tragic illusion. 6 months later, in March 1939, Hitler broke his promise. German troops marched into Prague and occupied the rest of Czechoslovakia. The mask was off. Hitler's ambitions went far beyond uniting Germans. He intended to dominate all of Europe. Next on Hitler's list was Poland. He demanded the return of the city of Danzig, Gdansk, and the right to build a highway across the Polish corridor, which separated East Prussia from the rest of Germany. Britain and France, realizing at last that appeasement had failed, pledged to defend Poland if it was attacked. Still, they hoped war could somehow be avoided. Then came one of the most shocking diplomatic moves in modern history. In August 1939, Hitler and Soviet leader Joseph Stalin signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, a non-aggression treaty between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. Secretly, the two dictators agreed to divide Eastern Europe between them. Poland would be split in half, and the Baltic states would fall under Soviet control. Now Hitler had nothing to fear from the east. At dawn on September 1st, 1939, German forces invaded Poland from the west. 2 days later, Britain and France declared war on Germany. World War II had begun. Within weeks, Poland was crushed under a new kind of warfare, blitzkrieg or lightning war. German tanks, planes and mechanized infantry struck with speed and coordination never seen before. By the end of September, the Soviet Union invaded from the east, sealing Poland's fate. Europe was once again engulfed in war, but this time the conflict would spread across the globe, claiming more lives and reshaping the world more profoundly than ever before. From the ashes of World War I rose a new generation of dictators, men who used nationalism, propaganda and terror to rebuild their nations and challenge the fragile peace. The League of Nations, crippled by inaction, failed to stop them. And by the time the world finally awoke to the danger, it was too late.